The problem with single-family housing is that we've had a shortage, and we've had it for a long time. We're about, 5 million homes behind, starting back in 2008 when a lot of people exited the industry, and we've never caught back up.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Jack Boss Show, where we talk about all things finance and real estate. And today we're going to talk about exactly those two subjects. We're talking about financing. We're talking about raising money for funds. We're talking about making yourself, your business recession-proof. And we're going to do that with our guests today, Wendy Sweet and Bill Fairman. So how are you guys doing today?
Awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes.
By the way, I don't know that you can ever make a business or your investment recession-proof. You can make it recession-resistant.
Okay. All right.
That's the goal, right?
Yeah.
All right. I like that distinction. Right. You're absolutely right. There's some there's some businesses that do better in recessions, but even those businesses have challenges. All right.
Sure.
So you think about the dollar store in recessions is probably doing extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a bunch of dollar stores that went out of business over the years and decades that they exist. So it just being recession proof doesn't make you succeed ultimately if the business fundamentals are not right.
That's exactly right.
You know, and getting back to the dollar stores, now because we have not just recession issues, but we also have inflation, they're not able to carry as many products as they used to because they're trying to stay in the dollar range. And there are plenty of stores now that aren't even carrying eggs because they cost way more than $1.
That's right.
Right. So they carry boxes of one egg.
Yeah. And then you have to insure them between the house and the store in case they break.
That's exactly right. So very cool. So you're right. The dollar stores are now $2 stores. It's just like the 99-cent burger is now a $10 burger. So with that said, this is really, let's jump right into that. So tell us about you guys. Where do you guys live? First of all, your brother and sister. Just want to make sure, sister and brother, ladies first. And where do you guys live?
So we live in the Carolinas. I'm in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Bill is in Indian Trail, North Carolina. I almost said Indian Land, but we're right on the border of where Charlotte is, on the border of North and South Carolina. And we lend throughout the Southeast.
So you are private lenders, you have a fund, and what else do you do?
Well, for a side gig, we have short-term rental properties in the Carolinas and in Florida. We have self-storage facilities in Tennessee and Missouri, and we're constantly buying and selling property, that kind of thing on the side. But the main thing is the lending. You know, it's a real full-time job.
All right, yeah. So tell us about that. How did you get in? What do you typically lend on?
Well, generally, we try to stay, and this is part of the recession-resistant piece. We're about 55% single-family, fix and flip and ground-up construction. We want to stay in the median price point in those property types. One of the things we learned from 2008 is that rents do not go down even in a housing recession. And as long as we're in that price point, we have Plan A is obviously the loan matures and pays off. Plan B is if it doesn't mature and pay off, somebody else can turn it into a rental. If we end up having to take the property back, and so Plan C would be to sell it, and Plan D is if we turn into another 2008 where everyone is a seller, no one is a buyer. We can hold that property and rent it out ourselves and still get the same, or at least close to, our investors' original returns, because those properties are going to continue to hold value.
Right.
And the worst case there is that
cash flow
values may go down, and if I have to sell it, then I'm going to lose money, and that means our investors are going to lose money. But if we hold on to it and rent it out for so many years, over time, it's going to come back up, and then we can sell it at that point. But we do a lot of small multifamily properties, small self-storage, strip centers as well. So we're about 90% in the total residential, but the rest of it is smaller commercial stuff.
Yeah, and what you said is like it's actually a theme in my podcast over the last few podcasts. Whichever guest I had, we're all always talking about how do you set yourself up such that you basically can't lose, right? And
from your mouth to God's ears.
well, absolutely. But like I interviewed Ron LeGrand just recently, and he talked about that he gets properties with a wraparound mortgage and things, and then he rents them out and with lease purchase agreement, and he sets himself up that the worst case scenario is that he still makes money, right? And what you just said is very similar. Like number one, you sell it with a profit. Number two, it's being rented out. Number three, if you have to take it back, you can rent it out. Number four, worst case, you can, or whichever way it was, like you ultimately you still get the returns close to what you are. So really with a long enough holding horizon in such kind of emergency situations, you don't lose.
Right.
And that's the key, Jack, is in this business, no matter what asset class you're in or what type of investing you do, because we all know there's a multitude of options out there if you want to make money in real estate. But the key is to have multiple exit strategies. And it can't be just one or two. You have to have multiple exit strategies, always looking at what's the worst thing that could happen. Because as we know, the worst thing can happen.
Right, absolutely. The worst comes up. Like that.
Prepared for it. Yeah,
absolutely.
Go ahead. Real estate and markets are always evolving, and you have to position yourself that you can take advantage of those evolving markets. You want to be proactive instead of reactive, but sometimes there's black swans that happen that you have no control over, and you just want to be able to minimize any issues that you have. So those additional strategies pay off.
100%. So with that said, let's dive a little bit deeper into your business model. So on houses or things like that, what are typically parameters that you're looking for? Like it's the median price we mentioned, but like loan to values, have those changed right now? Because I want to dive really into what's happening right now. We're in the beginnings or in the middle, or perhaps we haven't even started, or perhaps we're at the tail end of it. Nobody really knows. Nobody has a crystal ball, but we're somewhere in a downturn of the residential real estate market. Like land is a different kind of thing right now, but at least the way we do it. But here, like what do you guys do to protect yourself? What price? You mentioned the price ranges, so you're in the medium kind of level. Why is that?
So in our area,
your area is the southwest, the southeast of the United States.
Right? In the southeast, affordable housing is going to be 500, 400,000 or less. Okay. That's really affordable housing. We know that if for some reason we have to take it back, they can't get it refunded, whatever the issue is, that we can rent that property if we absolutely have to continue to pay those investor returns. So when we do this, we make sure that when we're lending, we would never lend more than 70% of what the after repaired value is. Now, people went crazy over the past 3 years thinking, oh, well, we know the value's going up, so we're going to buy based on that. Well, sorry, you can buy based on that, but we're not lending based on that.
Yeah, so and that's like that's the strategy of like the moving chair. That's the same thing that happened in 2007. Everyone bought because there's a greater fool that would buy that would pay more for it afterwards until the music stopped.
That's exactly right. So we don't play. The numbers are, the formula always works. It's tried and true. That 70% of the ARV has worked for decades and decades. And you know what, the only thing that changes are people's ability to be more greedy and take a higher risk and bring more money to the table than they should, and that kind of thing. Now, one of the things that we did change now that when we're underwriting properties, you know, most people will go back 6 to 12 months when they're pulling comps on properties. Well, we are really trying to keep it tight at 3 months because things are changing so quickly. We've got to really stick close with those things. So we'll tighten that up. We might require a little more out of pocket at closing, but for the most part, we're pretty cautious and vanilla, as we call it, to begin with. There's nothing sexy or exciting about what we're doing because we like to sleep at night and we want our investors to get their money back. So we keep it kind of calm and plain.
We're also in a really good market.
Yeah.
It's still growing. So there's more people moving here than leaving, and so that's helpful. We would change it. Yeah, we would change those parameters if we were lending in a different area, and that's one of the reasons we lend only in our backyard, because we have feet on the ground. We understand the market.
So in other words, a $500,000 house that has a $500,000 after repair value substantiated by comps from the last 3 months, you would lend $350,000 on.
That's
now,
correct.
In that case, do you lend purchase price plus rehab up to $350,000?
90% of the purchase and 100% of the rehab.
Okay,
So
all the way
it's
up
pretty-
to $350,000 in this example. So in other
Correct.
words, if somebody buys that, if that house needs $100,000 all in on rehab, you would basically lend 90% of the $250,000. So they would have to come up with $25,000 to the table. You lend 225, or somewhere close to it, or like they're like 370. You would lend like 240, 345, and then the $100,000 rehab, you lend the full amount, as long as the total amount you lend is not more than the $350,000 in that scenario.
Correct. That is correct.
Yeah, and we're, even though we're a private lender, we're still a lot like a bank. We require 6 months worth of reserves as well. We're getting bank statements, we're pulling tri-merge credit reports, we're doing background checks on all the primary officers of the LLC that's doing the work. They need to
have some experience.
Yeah, they need to know what they're doing.
Yeah.
We're working with people that have been there and done that. We used to work with new folks. We've been very fortunate over the past 5 years that it's covered up a lot of mistakes, but now it's time for the professionals to be in the business.
Yeah, it's not easy out there right now. You've got to be cautious in everything you do, and use your brain trust. Use other people that have been doing what you're doing. It's there's lots of piles of poo out there that you can step in. So the key is to really avoid that. And you do that by being involved in local groups and masterminds and, your local RIA groups. There's all kinds of things you can do to keep up with what's going on around you. And when you run into trouble, don't hide it.
Yeah. Now that's an important point. Like a lot of people try to hide it and keep appearances up and stuff like that. And it'll come out eventually anyway. And that'll does the worst thing possible. It destroys your reputation.
That's exactly right. I can't tell you how many people I know that hid what they were going through instead of just telling a few people that have experience, because we've all been there. All of us have lost money at some point. We've all run into brick walls. And the goal is not to sit around and talk about you. We want to help you get past it and be successful. We can't make loans to people who are out of business. We like for them to be in business when we're making loans, and we'd like to continue that. So, this isn't about just doing the business. It's about surrounding yourself with a network that's there to lift you up and encourage you and help you get better, because there's enough out there for all of us.
Absolutely. You said something interesting that mentioned like it's time for the professionals to step up and for the professionals to do the work. And really, this is, I think, a big important item to talk about. If I want to rephrase it, not necessarily the professionals, but the ones that know how to run numbers tight. Because in the past, you could make, you mentioned it, I think, Bill, that in the past, you could make mistakes and the market would cover it up. Or was it Wendy? I don't know who said it, but
it was Bill.
you could had the market covered it up, because if it takes you 4 months to rehab a house, which ideally the pros do faster, but let's say if it takes you 4 months, and then by the time the market went up by 15%, you could have made some mistakes and still make money in the process.
That's right.
Well, if the market is stable or stagnant or going down a bit, the longer you take, the less mistakes you can afford. So number one, speed is important. And number two, you have to have your numbers right, because any $5,000 or $10,000 mistake can wipe you out of that deal, right? Go
That
ahead.
gets to the point about why we're in the lending business.
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about that.
Well, if you're the contractor or you're the flipper, okay, you have all the responsibility. Everything falls on you if it goes right or goes wrong. You do get, dollar-wise, you get more of the profit, but you're putting in way more hours than anybody else that's involved in that transaction. And when you're in the lending position, you're controlling the asset without being responsible for the asset, and you're putting in the least amount of actual man hours into the project.
Right.
So if you look at it by the hour, the lender makes a lot more money per transaction than the person that owns the actual property.
Very good point. Now, how do you structure, like when you give, you obviously don't, you're not just sitting on a pile of cash of your own money. You didn't just you didn't win the lottery and things like that. So, I mean, you flipped some houses and things yourself and made some money, but how does your structure typically look like because you also have a fund? So let's talk about a little bit about how you raise money and what the money, meaning the investors that come to you, what do they receive? How is this structured? How are they secured? Tell us a little bit about how this all works.
Would you start off with where we came from first?
Let me tell you about how I really got started in this business back in 2001, I guess it was. I started working with Larry Goins. You know Larry.
I know Larry. Yes, we're all part of a big mastermind with each other.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. So Larry and I had a mortgage company together, and we specialized in doing investor-only loans. And during that time, that's when I would, see two applications. One guy had plenty of money in the bank, but he couldn't find houses. Another guy had no money in the bank and found plenty of houses. So I started lending them each other's money. I didn't realize it was called hard money, so I kind of fell into that. And that's really how the hard money grew. And really, I got to a point where I had raised $23 million of other people's money, self-directed IRA money, to it. And I'm doing the puzzle, taking three people here to be in first position and lend the money to this guy. And it was just getting crazy. So that's
it was
really
all fractionalized loans at that point.
So in 2012, I was finally able to convince Bill to come and work with me. He actually got me in the business to begin with. But I had to keep sending him my bank statements. Look, I'm making money. Please, I can't do this by myself anymore. I need your help. So he came and we started Carolina Hard Money together. And that's when we knew we needed a fund. And that was really Bill that put that fund together.
I guess the brother-sister relationship is not so different than the husband-wife position.
That's right.
Sometimes
we do what our wives tell us to, or what the lady in the relationship, in this case your sister, but the lady in the relationship tells us to do, right?
So the fractionalized loan piece, it was a lot of energy spent on stuff that was not very productive, trying to put all the pieces together. So we started this fund, and all the investors that we had initially are all active investors, because they're actively looking at the deals, they're looking at the appraisals, they're deciding whether they want to buy that note or not. With a fund, everyone has to be a passive investor. They have no choice. They have no say-so. So that group of investors,
we had to retrain them or tell them goodbye.
We essentially only came out with about 25% of those folks actually came into the fund. Now, a lot of them weren't accredited, and we chose the fund that you had to be an accredited investor, which means they had to have $1 million in net worth or make a certain amount of money each year. And so some of them didn't qualify, but retraining the ones that were active into passive, that gets kind of tough. Eventually they learn, though, why should I do all this work actively when I can make nearly as much passively and still have that safety? And one of the things a fund does for the investor is it gives you a lot more diversity. So we have $20 million in our fund right now. Our average loan size is $200, $200, 200,000. So that's a lot of loans in there that if
Well,
one or
I
two
was
go
about to
south,
say, you do micro lending, $20 a
No.
piece?
So there's a lot of loans, and that's safety. So if a couple of them go south on you, nobody even notices.
Right.
That's part of the expenses is putting aside loan loss reserves. So it doesn't change your yield any. But if you're one of those people that has 200,000 into a single asset and it goes south, it doesn't mean you're going to lose money, but you're sure not making any until we figure out the disposition of the property. So it's just
strength in numbers.
that,
Yeah.
and in your head, the anxiety goes away about worrying about this deal that you're not getting payments on, right?
Yeah.
That said, our fund is real simple. Our loans are interest only. So the way our fund is set up is that all the investors are equity members of an LLC.
Okay.
And at the end of every quarter, we're just scraping the expenses, and then all the profit goes out to the investors, and they have a choice. They can roll it over and use it to compound over time, or they can take it as income each quarter. It's a pretty simple process. I like
Nice.
simple things.
What is your typical return?
Well, our actual returns expected in the documents are between 7 and 9%. The only time we were in the 7% range was the COVID year. We've been in the upper 9s to 10% most of the time since we've been in business.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Very good. That's actually very nice. And I love the fact that you actually allow them to keep it in and compound it. Right. That is really if that is really one of the key things that in most funds or even in private placements and multifamily syndications so on is not the case, because you give them that choice, because typically on a multifamily property or self-storage or something, once that thing is funded, and you don't need more money in the deal. Right. Obviously, in your guys' case, you guys are looking to grow your fund as an ongoing basis. So it makes sense to say hey, you want that 9 or 10%, or can I put it right back in and have it keep working for you, which is highly attractive, because if you don't do that in a normal thing, you pay it out and people use it to now go buy their groceries and go on vacation with it.
That's right.
And then, yes, they made that return, but their money is not growing compound on a normal deal. In your guys' case, it is growing compound, which is absolutely a brilliant little tweak to it that I don't know I've heard that many times before. So that's a really, really cool thing.
See,
it's great for self-directed money too.
Right, because it's going to sit there anyway. But that was the difference between people owning a note or a piece of a note and being in a fund, where when the note is complete, now you have to look for another note.
Exactly. And if you get busy and that money comes back to you and it sits there for 3 months, and then you get it out for 3 months, you ended up making 10% 6 months of the time, which now your average return for the year is only 5%.
Yeah.
Right.
I do that myself with my own money.
Oh, I do that all the time with my own money. It sits there and then it makes good money and then it comes back. Yes. So 100%. I love that. Love that idea.
Yeah. So that's those are benefits of the fund. However, the downside of being in a fund, if you are a micromanager or an engineering type and you have to be in control of everything, it's going to drive you crazy. So if you have that personality type, funds probably are not going to be a good idea for you. But for most people, you don't want to have a second job of managing your money. You would just like to watch it grow. Yeah. And your due diligence is on the fund manager and the company, not necessarily how the money is working.
And that's another really good point, I think, that you brought up, and whether it's us or with anybody else, understanding who the sponsor is, who's that fund manager, knowing their track record, who they are as people, what their character is, what their experience is. All of those are questions that you should be asking when you're looking at any fund to invest in. So it's not just the asset and how the fund is set up that's important. It's really, you need to investigate those sponsors as well, because there's people out there that really do good and know what they're doing. And then there's other people who are Madoff type characters.
Well, the vast
And
majority of fund managers aren't, the Madoff type people. And even if things do go south, they didn't do it intentionally. Things happen.
Yeah, it does.
No, but I do 100% agree with you, because even in this is a key point in any investment you do, because like, let's say if you don't invest in a fund, but you give somebody your money as a rehabber. Well, if they're crappy operator, if they're crappy rehabber,
That's right.
they burn your money on stuff that it shouldn't be doing, that doesn't add to the property. And then they have a hard time selling the property because it doesn't look like it's good, or perhaps it's a partial, they abandon it. And now your money is truly at risk, right?
That's right.
If you instead invest with a clean, good, experienced operator, even if it's not a fund, they're going to put your money to the work, make every dollar look like $2, get the most out of it, and you have a smooth experience. And it's the same with funds. It's the same with multifamily operators. Like, we do land flipping, but we also do multifamily. We just right now have a situation where we have a multifamily that we bought 6 years ago. It was positioned for sale, and it was hit by a hurricane, and it cost $2 million in damages.
Oh no.
The insurance company doesn't want to pay, and our partner threw up his arms after a while, saying like, I got no more money and I can't pay for this anymore. Well, if that syndication would have been led up by some guy that just thought, multifamily is a good idea, let me just go get some money, and while I have a job that I'm making $100,000 a year, I'm now part-time syndicating that deal. Guess what happens? You're sitting on a $2 million repair that might take years for the insurance company to pay. We're now suing the insurance company. And
Right.
who is going to fix that property? Nobody. So you got to do a fire sale.
That's right.
If you work with the right people, though, in this case, us, we stepped in and we're putting $2 million of our own money into that deal. Just had a call with our contractor today. That's another $400,000 of air conditions alone that we have to fix on that thing, because the hurricane destroy them all. And we're going to be putting between $2 and $2.5 million into that property. But by the end of this year, it's going to be ready for sale. And everyone's going to get their money back, including us. We're not going to make any money on it. But I'm going to die before I'd rather die before I not pay my investors back.
That's right.
So it's kind of like, and we have those reserves on the side. We never thought we would need them.
Yeah.
But you know what? Because stuff happens, we now have the ability to use them. We have the lines of credit. We have the cash ability to put that thing in place. And that's the difference between an operator that doesn't know what you're doing, and an operator that's what you're doing. So yes, you do need to check your operator. You need to check the principals, the syndicators, the people in charge, because that's where your return lives and dies by. I'm 100% sure of that.
And your character too, Jack. I mean, you stepping up to say, hey,
Of course,
I'm going to die before I don't pay my investors back.
Right.
And that's character. There's not a lot of people out there like that.
One good question to ask.
Unfortunately, you don't know them until it happens, but then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That can be true.
A good due diligence question to ask for any operator is, how long can you operate with 25% vacancy, or let's say 75% in your case, 75% vacancy rate? How long can you operate with that? Because you're waiting on repairs. In our particular situation, how long can you run with only 75% of your current business model? You lose 25% of your business. How long can you operate with that model in mind? And you want to see their efficiencies, and is their business set up where a large majority of the income isn't transactional? So if you have, because you're not doing transactional in the multifamily, it is monthly payments, but if you lost 25% of your units, how long can you survive like that? Same thing with us. The money that we make is not, it's not transactional. It's mostly from loan
I mean,
fees.
you got two
and
income
interest
sources.
payments.
You got the fees and you got the interest, right? So I
Right,
totally get
right.
what you're saying. You're basically saying like, well, if you lose 25% of your transactions, and if your entire business is depending on the transaction fees, you're in
Right.
trouble, right?
Yeah.
So yes, that's a good question to ask. Is like, how long
Plus
can
you
you
wanna-
operate?
Right. Plus, you want to ask people about their scars. I mean, anybody who's been through the ringer is more than happy to share that they've been through the ringer and here's how I got out of it.
Right.
Because that's what makes somebody strong is,
Mhm.
you know, what have you been through that's really just knocked you to your core and how did you get out of it?
Yeah.
That's the key. Did you walk away or did you dig out of it? And that person that dug out of it is the one you want to be doing business with.
Yeah. Actually, that reminds me of something I just heard the other day. This is like, what is ultimately they studied a whole bunch of people, including also a whole bunch of people that went through the horrible German Nazi times and were in like the concentration camps and came out of it. And then they measured kind of like their happiness level later on. And it turns out that a lot of people that had the hardest hardships, including the concentration camps later in life, were actually scored higher and were happier because they were put to the ringer. And of course, that was horrible and nobody needs it in their life. But there's something to be said that if life tests you and you come out of it and you figure out how to make it through that, you have a different level of appreciation. You also have a different level of performance in your life because it's like, if I was able to get through that, I can get to really anything in life. And that's the kind of people you want to surround yourself with. So I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think you hit on the appreciation factor.
Yeah.
You do appreciate life more
Oh.
when it's been tested.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in everything they say, there's everything you want to accomplish in life in order to, like, people have always good ideas, and there's like, you have the idea and then and then you see the end result. What people don't see in the middle is the shit sandwich.
That's right.
And so the bigger the shit sandwich is, excuse my language here, the easier and if you're willing to go through it, and if you've gone through it, I mean, the more you've grown. Right? The more you've grown and the more you can handle. So yeah, the people who had the biggest challenges are the people that have the biggest abilities at the end, because you don't grow by doing nothing.
That's right. You're not afraid of the unknown because you know it now. You've been there. The unknown isn't as scary as it once was once you've been through all that.
And in business, failure shouldn't be considered failure. Failure is a learning experience, and you just need to make sure you don't do the same thing again.
Absolutely.
It's okay to fail at things. Just don't fail at the same things over and over again.
That's just
if you have to relearn the lesson a few too many times, it's time to look for something else, right? Yeah. But other than that,
it's time to be a W-2 employee at that point.
Yeah. Not everyone is made to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I mean, I love Gary Vaynerchuk. He talks about that, and other people out there. Not everyone is made to be the owner with all the stresses and all the tension and all the risks and all the things that comes with it. Some people are made to become amazing number twos. And if you look at it, like what's it, Steve Ballmer? You look at most of the people in Microsoft, they're like billionaires. They're not owners. They were just they're not the founders. Bill Gates was the founder and one other guy, but on Apple, the same thing. Some of these multi-billionaires from Apple, they were just employee number 3, employee number 4, employee number 5, and take a critical role in the company, but they never owned the company. So it's there's something to be said about that. Well, with that said, guys, let me see. How can we help you? What if somebody wants to invest with you or wants to learn more about that, how can I get a hold of you guys?
Well, it's pretty simple. CarolinaHardMoney.com, or they can email me at bill@CarolinaHardMoney.com.
All right, very good. That's easy enough. And there's also, I mean, and I think they can contact you and email you for both if they have deals that they need financing, as well as they want to invest money, right?
That's
correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So what's kind of a minimum criteria for a person to work with if they have a deal that they want money for? What are you looking for? And is there some parameters like how many deals they have done, et cetera, how long they have been in business or so in the current market?
Well, we'd like them to have at least a couple of deals under their belt. We want to make sure they have some money in the bank. A credit score needs to be at least 650, but really we're kind of looking at 680 at this point.
Okay.
We like to know that they're involved in the area with small groups, investor groups, that kind of thing, constantly training themselves. So those, and of course the deal has to work. That's key.
Very good. Very good.
But they can run a scenario by us, and we're not going to waste their time. The deal either has legs or it doesn't.
Right.
So, and we're happy to look at them. Yeah.
Wonderful. So is there anything else that you want to share with us? I love the business model. I love the fact that investors get compounded. I love the fact that you're careful right now, that you're doing 70% of after repair value, that you require the partners or the people, the actual rehabbers to have some experience. I mean, these are all little factors that make for a big shield and make it, if not recession-proof, then very much recession-resistant. So very much so.
I just want to end with the fact that single-family housing is not going anywhere. The problem with single-family housing is that we've had a shortage, and we've had it for a long time. We're about 5 million homes behind, starting back in 2008 when a lot of people exited the industry, and we've never caught back up. So single-family housing is still wanted. Now, real estate is local, so there are areas where people are moving away from that may be losing a little bit of value. But if you stick in those, and you can easily pull these stats up, go to U-Haul and figure out where all the trucks are going. You'll know where the areas where the prices are still holding. They may take a little bit longer to sell, even though interest rates are going up.
People always need a place to live.
If you're worried about your asset being backed or your money being backed by a solid asset, single-family housing is still going to be a pretty safe bet.
And the United States is also still one of the few countries where population is growing. Now, obviously, there's a population growth in third world countries, continues to be the case, but like China is about to go off a cliff population-wise. I mean, they realized they had the one-child policy, and now people can have more than one child, but it's almost too late because the entire population is now in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and they're about to, as hard as it sounds, die off. Right? They're going to have 30-40% less people in China in the next 40-50 years than they have today. Europe is the same thing. Europe is aging dramatically. I just was in Europe and with my daughter, and she's like, "Hey, I only see old people around here." And it's like, when she's 15, everyone over 25 in her mind is old. But she's right. She's right. There's some families with young kids, and as soon as, particularly in smaller cities, as soon as these kids grow up, they go off to the colleges and they go off to the bigger cities. And in my particular case where I grew up, it's in one of the areas in Europe or in Germany where people go retire to. So it's very pretty. So there's lots of population, but they're all older and they're all going to pass away at some point of time. And if you look at that, the U.S. is one of the few places in the world, through immigration and other reasons, we're still having net population growth. So there's this shortage is not going to go away. I 100% agree with you. So this is a safe area, particularly you're in the Carolinas, the Southeast. It's a growth area of this country. You're in a good spot with a good model. So I love it. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jack,
for having us.
It was awesome.
All right. With that said, guys, if you enjoy this show, make sure you were listening to it on iTunes. Give us a 5-star review. Give us share it with friends. If you're watching this on YouTube, as always, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. And if you're listening or watching it anywhere else, do the exact same thing. With that said, see you in the next episode. Thank you very much, guys.